This presentation is about increasing your job security. I'm Lawrence Shatkin. I've been working in the field of careers for more than 30 years. I've learned a lot over that time about job security, partly from losing a couple of jobs myself. Security is a value that a lot of people look for in their work. Some people value it more than others, but its importance in the population tends to go up during bad economic times or some time after that when people remember how bad things were. And I'm going to talk in this presentation about two strategies to improve your job security. One is choosing an industry or an occupation that is relatively secure, and it may be one you're going into as a young person for the first time, or it may be something where you're making a career shift in mid-career. The other strategy is to take steps to make your own job, the one you have now, more secure. Now you may wonder, why do you need security? Consider that when you're unemployed for a certain period of time, your skills tend to erode, and I'm not talking just about technical skills, also your soft skills. Because of this, employers tend to be reluctant to hire you if you are out of the workforce. In fact, there have even been job postings that have been seen that say that unemployed people need not apply. As a result, it's easier to hop from one job to another than to bounce back from unemployment. Let's look at where we are now in terms of employment. We are coming out of a recession now. And although it really happened quite some time ago that this recession hit, it's very slow in ending. The gross domestic product keeps on rising. Businesses have a lot of money, but the jobs aren't there. There are very few jobs compared to most other recoveries, and some people call this a jobless recovery. And some of the factors causing this are automation, namely robots and sophisticated computer programs can do the work. There's a certain amount of offshoring that goes on where jobs get shipped to foreign countries, and then there's a certain amount of work being done by contingency workers, people who are part-timers, people who are on a temporary basis, or in some cases even interns. This graph is a look at how we're coming out of this recession, and it compares it to previous recessions in terms of how long it took to bounce back since their starting time, and also how deep they got. And as you can see, compared to other recessions after World War II, this one is both deeper and longer lasting. You notice that the brown curve here, the one for the previous recession that followed the collapse of the dot-com bubble, that one also had a very slow recovery. And the one before that, the black line, has a fairly slow recovery. So you see with each subsequent recession, it seems as if the recovery is getting slower and slower because of those forces that I mentioned before, namely automation and offshoring and use of contingency workers. This graph is a look at what it was like, pretty much the pit of this recession, the amount of jobs that were lost in various industrial sectors. There are three of them that don't have actual losses, where there actually were some small gains. The biggest of those, of course, being education and health services. Mining and logging was mostly pulled up by the energy sector, by oil extraction in particular. But you notice there's a really big loss there, professional and business services, and construction, manufacturing, retail, leisure and hospitality. Some of these industries depend on having disposable income, particularly leisure and hospitality. So construction got hit very badly because this was a recession was caused by a collapse of a housing boom. By the way, information which appears here does not mean high-tech. This means publishing news. This is a look at the economy 3 years later, when we were starting to dig our way out of this recession. And you'll see that most of the bars are on the right side of the central axis, meaning that they're adding workers rather than losing them. The one that's continuing to lose them is the government bar, particularly the state and especially local level, where the tax revenue had been lost as a result of this recession, as a result of slowdown in business activity. You'll also notice a similar impact on education. If you look at the education and health services bar, education contributed nothing to that, whereas most of the growth there was in health and to some extent in social services. Now here's a chart showing 1 year later, December 2012. Most of the same trends have continued. There's continuing growth in healthcare that's still doing very well. Education is starting to rally a little bit. Leisure and hospitality has picked up quite a bit. Transportation and warehousing is still doing very well. Construction has picked up quite a bit since a year earlier. But the government is still hurting. In fact, whereas the state had zero change in employment a year before this, now it's losing 3,000 workers. And the federal government, you'll notice, is also losing workers, whereas previously it was actually gaining slightly. You may be wondering where to get information about the relative security of occupations and the factors behind the security or insecurity of occupations. And the definitive source for this is the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which gets published by GIST Publishing based on information from the U.S. Department of Labor. Now here are some examples of very sensitive occupations, and if you're very concerned about security, you may want to avoid these. Take, for example, the stockbrokers or the financial analysts and personal financial advisors. When there is a downturn in the economy, these people can often lose their jobs. Many of these occupations depend on disposable income. For example, the flight attendants and the hotel desk clerks, and the electronic home entertainment installers, and the chefs, fashion designers. The construction industry tends to be fairly sensitive to the economy also, and so that has an impact on the construction manager jobs and the jobs for electricians and some other construction jobs, plumbers, welders. Now here are some examples of relatively insensitive occupations, and I have to emphasize there is no such thing as a truly secure occupation. It's always a relative matter, and some are more insensitive, therefore more secure than others. You'll notice a lot of these are healthcare occupations. People are always getting sick. Also, some of these jobs are for government functions that are very hard to do without. For example, air traffic controllers, the court reporters, the probation officers. And you'll notice automobile service technicians and mechanics here. There's some repair occupations like this that are fairly insensitive because during bad times, people make the cars or other equipment they have try to run a little longer rather than trading it in for a new one. Here are some occupations that are slightly sensitive, but the job growth is so good for these, they're expanding so rapidly that it seems that there will be a little impact on them even in a recession. And some of these are these computer occupations. You notice a number of high-tech occupations. These are the computer occupations that tend to be very collaborative. You can't simply hand over a set of specifications to a programmer on the other side of the ocean and have that programmer turn in the work. You have to work collaboratively. Here's some occupations that are at risk for offshoring. I mentioned earlier that computer occupations that don't involve a lot of collaboration can be sent overseas very easily. The same thing applies to engineering occupations where the work is not especially collaborative. You may wonder about aircraft mechanics and service technicians. After all, they have to put their hands on the aircraft. However, the aircraft themselves can be flown overseas, so the work can be done there. For multimedia artists and animators, I suggest you look at the credits at the end of The Simpsons. You notice a lot of foreign names. I believe that most of that work gets done in South Korea. Here are some industries that have high concentrations of relatively secure jobs. You notice high-tech there. That's not surprising. In healthcare. Educational services is a little bit mixed in that there will be more work in areas of it that are not paid for by tax money. The security in government, as you saw earlier, is mixed in that there is less security at the state and local level than there is at the federal level, at least at this time. Insurance tends to be relatively secure because it's something that's not seen as a luxury, it's something that's seen as a necessity. Repair and maintenance, as I mentioned earlier, is something that is needed even in bad times. People tend to keep their things running. And utilities are something that are needed 24/7. Now, there are not a lot of people working in utilities jobs. Nowadays, it's so automated that a power plant, for example, will have a very small crew, but they are relatively secure in those jobs. So here we have the best paying occupations in the educational services industry. And not surprisingly, the chief executives get paid the most. The managers in general in most industries get paid the most. Here we have the fastest growing occupations in the computer design services field. And obviously in this field, a lot of these are going to be high-tech jobs. But you notice accountants and auditors is also here. Now here are the occupations with the largest number of job openings in government. It's no surprise that several of these are in law enforcement and other protective services. Now that you've seen these various relatively secure industries and occupations in them, you may want to aim for these occupations in these industries if you're considering an initial career or considering a career shift. However, you may want to add security to your existing job. You may not be ready to make a move to another career. And one way to add security is simply to move to a less sensitive industry. For example, if you look at the job growth projected for accountants and auditors in the field of federal government, the field of offices of physicians, it's really quite good. But in a couple of other fields, it's quite awful. So this is something to consider. The other main strategy for adding security to your job is to make yourself irreplaceable, someone they don't want to fire. One way to do this is to be very involved with a core mission of the business. Every business has a core function, something that basically pays the bills, that keeps the doors open. You want to focus on that, work in that area, be knowledgeable about that area, improve your skills towards that area. Another important strategy is to understand change that's going on in your field. Be aware of the new technologies, the new business practices, the new business environment. It might be legal environment, it might be competition. Learn about these changes and be able to help your business survive these changes and thrive in these changes. Productivity is also very important, and by this I don't mean just working long hours into the evening. It means working in a smart way, working in a way so that the time you do spend on the job turns out more results. Visibility is also important. There used to be a joke at a job that I previously had that the person who got the best performance appraisal was always a person with the office next to the manager. And there is some truth to this in that if people know the work they're doing, they're more likely to appreciate it. Some ways to be visible are to be involved in some sort of news spreading effort, such, for example, tweeting about what you're doing, putting up a bulletin board about a project you're working on, letting other people in other parts of the company know the work you're doing. Acquiring a mentor can also be helpful in spreading the news about your skills. This person can also help steer you towards the core mission of the business and towards improving your skills. Being pleasant is also really important. You may think you're going to get ahead more by backstabbing, but in the end, people prefer to work with people who communicate well, with people who are nice to be around. In spite of following all of these suggestions, you may lose a job, and as I said earlier, I've lost a couple of jobs. And it helps to be resilient, to be able to bounce back. How do you do this? One way is to specialize in some way, have some particular goal that you're aiming for. My goal has been to be well known in the field of career information, and it's a fairly small field. Obviously, there are some fields that are very big and hard to get a footprint in, but you may be able to carve out a particular niche where you can build a reputation. And when I say build a reputation, it helps to be visible beyond a particular workplace where you're employed. If you can get some visibility in your industry, that can be very helpful for bouncing back from a job loss. So, for example, if you become active in a professional association, and it particularly helps to be involved in some sort of communications function, that can increase your visibility. Another thing you might do is to participate in a blog in some way. Obviously, not everyone has the communication skills or knowledge to be able to maintain a blog, but you may be able to give useful comments on a blog and therefore increase your visibility. Everyone's told to keep your resume up to date, but a lot of people don't do this. That's something you should pay attention to. And that includes places such as LinkedIn and other sites like that, where it's not exactly a resume, but it does have information about you that people may be looking at. You have to keep your skills up to date, and that involves, again, not just the technical skills, but also the soft skills. And finally, I tell you to believe in yourself. It's very easy to say this kind of thing, but it's important to understand how important this is. When I lost one job where I'd been working for 19 years and I was looking at college tuition payments staring me in the face, my daughter was a junior in high school and she said to me, "Dad, think of this as an adventure." I'm not sure where that came from, but it really was words of wisdom. Rather than thinking of your life as turning into a tragedy, think of what has happened as a plot complication and that your story will continue and may turn into something really good. The projections for job growth and job openings in this presentation were based on projections of the U.S. Department of Labor. And there's always a certain amount of uncertainty involved in any of these things. And there's also a certain amount of uncertainty involved in your decisions about how you're going to make yourself more productive or what new skills you should be learning, even what the core function of your business is now, because it may change. So it's difficult to predict the future, but if you're a resilient person, you can roll with the punches and deal with these setbacks as they occur and bounce back. Here's some ways you can get in touch with me. I have a Twitter feed, I have a Facebook fan page, and I have a home page. I also maintain a blog, and you can find out about it at chatkin.com. Thank you for listening to this presentation.